Hey guys, this is Eric Vasquez here with a brand new tutorial for you today from designcuts.com. Now in this tutorial we're going to be working on creating a summer movie preview poster using the Ultimate Creative Design Bundle featuring high quality design elements from incredible fonts to stunning effects and so much more. Today we'll be using a handful of these elements including the awesome Marquee Light Bulbs pack from TVartworks along with some cool design elements from MixPixBox and Feingold Shop. Now, if you're all ready to get started, then fire up Photoshop and let's roll. Now, here all we're doing is we're just going to set up our new document. So first and foremost, I'm going to enter a name for my file. I'm just going to call it Summer Movie Preview Poster. All right, and then let's make sure that our document is set to inches, and we're going to make it 6 inches wide by 9 inches tall, 300 for the resolution. RGB color is fine for now because it's mostly just going to be viewed on screen and in a poster mockup that we'll be using later on. And now for the background contents, let's just go ahead and change it to black. And then once you've done that, go ahead and hit create to make your new file. Now all we're going to do here is double click on the background layer to unlock it. Double click the layer 0 text and just rename this layer background in all caps. It doesn't have to be all caps, but I just like to do that because I'm pretty blind when it comes to looking at screens all day. So from here, let's go ahead and go up to File, and then we'll choose Place Embedded. And we're going to begin by bringing in one of our resources here from Feingold Shop. Okay, so what we're going to do here is just open this up. We choose Place Embedded, and it automatically comes in with the name of the file, which is great. And it also happens to be a smart object, which is also pretty nice. So what we're going to do now is hold the Alt, Option, and Shift keys and drag outwards from any of the 4 corners of the bounding box to scale this up. And then let's just move it up just so the top is a little bit cropped off. Right? Maybe it doesn't have to be totally cropped, but somewhere about there looks pretty good. And then go ahead and hit return on the keyboard. Now what we want to do from here is apply some layer styles. So go ahead and double click on the moon. And the first thing that we're going to do is add an inner shadow. I've got a solid black fill color, an opacity of 100%, distance 0, choke 28, and the size set to 250. And now before we close out of here, let's go ahead and also check off the outer glow option. Now for the outer glow, we're going to reduce this to 73%, and we're going to change the blending mode to make sure that it's set to linear dodge as shown here. Now for the settings below, leave it set to 0 for the spread, 250 for the size, and then just go ahead and check the fill color for a moment. We want to use the hex value EBAA56. Then go ahead and click OK twice to apply the changes. Now come on down here to the adjustment layer icon on the bottom of the layers palette. And what we want to do is choose Hue Saturation Adjustment. Now over here in the properties, you can see that we have this colorize box. So let's go ahead and check that. And that's basically just going to create this kind of tonal version of the image. Let's move the hue slider to about 24, 25. Move the saturation to about 53 or so. 53, 54 looks pretty good. And you can leave the lightness set to 0 for now. Now we're going to select the moon once again, return down here to the adjustment layer icon, and this time let's go ahead and choose black and white. What does matter though is the blending mode, so we want to change that from normal to soft light, and then just tap the number 5 on your keyboard. And you can see all that does is reduce the opacity to 50%. Alright, so now I'm going to select my top hue saturation adjustment layer, hold the shift key and select the moon, and then press Command G to put it into a new group folder, and I'm just going to call this layer moon. We can do the same for the background, just double click the background text, press Command C, then Command G to put it into a folder, double click the group 1 text, and press Command V to paste the same name. Okay, so now as you've seen here, I'm just going to be placing a lot of these elements into folders to help me keep things organized so I can keep track throughout the tutorial. Now let's go back to the File menu and choose Place Embedded once again. This time we'll be returning to the freebies, and we can now start bringing in some elements from TVartworks. Now what we want to do first is open up the Standboard A PNG file along with the color mask file that goes with it. Unfortunately, we can only select one thing at a time when we do File, Place Embedded, but that's okay. Let's just go ahead and click Place first on the color mask, and then go back to File Embedded one more time, and now we'll choose the Stands PNG image. So once you do this, you'll see that they're stacked directly on top of each other. If I turn this layer off, you can see the color mask. And the great thing about this pack is that all of the letters, light bulbs, stands, and everything else pretty much comes with a color mask. Now, if I bring the color mask layer on top, you'll see that there's some blue, some magenta, some red, and some yellow. So all we need to do is use our magic wand tool, okay? And we're going to do that just after we scale this up a bit. So before I do that, let me zoom out, select both of these layers together, press Command T to do a free transform, and I'm going to hold Alt, Option, and Shift and just drag outwards to scale this up. All right, now I'm going to slide this over here towards the left side of the image and press Return. All right, maybe move it down a little bit more. Somewhere about there looks pretty good. All right, and now I'm going to use the magic wand. So I'll press W on the keyboard to grab the magic wand tool, click on any of this blue area in here, and then come up to the Select menu and choose Similar. Now what this is going to do is select all the other blue areas on the color mask. So once you've done that, you can turn off that layer, select your Stand Boards A layer, and then come down to the adjustment layer icon, and now we'll choose Hue Saturation. All we're going to do here is just change the lightness a little bit. You can see what happens as I move this slider to the left. It's making only those areas that we've selected darker. Okay, so we can leave it set somewhere around here, maybe to -9 or 10 or something like that. And that looks pretty good. All right, and the nice thing is that it already has a layer mask applied to it. So go ahead and press Command D to deselect that area, turn your color mask back on, and now what I'm going to do is select all three of these layers. So I'm going to select the color mask, hold Shift, select Stand Boards A, and press Command J on the keyboard. Now you can turn off the visibility of the first color mask, grab these top copies here, press Command T, slide it over to the opposite side. All right, maybe somewhere about there looks pretty good. Once you're happy with the position, just go ahead and press Return on the keyboard. And now do the same thing on this side. Press W to get the magic wand, select an area of the blue, come up to Select, and choose Similar. Turn that off. You'll see there's a little bit of an issue here. See, since we already have this layer mask applied, what we want to do is hold the Control key and click on the layer mask and delete it, because we now want to apply a new instance over this side. So while we still have our selection active here, we're on our Hue Saturation Adjustment layer. Go ahead and apply a new layer mask, and there you go. Okay, so we can now select the first color mask, hold Command, select the second one. Now we're just going to delete those because we don't really need them anymore. And if you'd like to, you can always adjust these a little bit, maybe move them a little bit more to the outer edges. Okay, so select the top Hue Saturation Adjustment layer, hold Shift, and select the layer just below it. Press V to get your Move tool, and then you might just tap it over a few times like that. Select the next Hue Saturation Adjustment layer, hold Shift, and select the layer below. Then just tap it over a few times while holding Shift. Okay, so we've basically now got two stands on opposite sides. I'm going to select the top layer, hold Shift, and select the bottom stand Smart Object layer, and press Command G. Double-click the Group 1 text and call this folder Side Stands. Create a new layer, which you can do either by clicking on the New Layer icon at the bottom of the Layers palette, or by using the keyboard shortcut Command-Control plus Alt-Option plus Shift and the letter N on the keyboard. Okay, so now that we've got our new layer, we want to go back to File and choose Open. Okay, I'm going to come back to the TVartworks folder and choose the With Bulbs folder. Now in here you guys will have a couple of letters which you can use. So the first letter that we're going to be using is the letter G. Choose Open, hold Control and click on the layer and convert it into a smart object. I'm going to move that to the side, click and drag it into my document, and what I want to do is just scale it down. So I'm going to press Command Control plus T on the keyboard, shrink this down a bit here, you place it somewhere over here in the center, and then what we're going to do is spell out Grand on one line and then Opening on the line below. Okay, so we're going to bring in the next letter, R, and it is a little bit tedious just to manually typeset these, but all we're going to do is just bring these in here so we can spell them out. Now in the full bundle, you guys will have access to the actual Marquee Light Bulb font, so you won't have to, manually set each of your letters up, but the idea here is just to spell out the word that you want. Now I'm going to zoom in here, Press Command and R on the keyboard to make sure that my rulers are showing. You can see them on the top and the left side. And I'm just going to bring down a couple of guides real quick. And I'm going to place it along the top edge of the R, then drag down another one and place it along the bottom edge of the R, and make sure that each of my letters matches up and is aligned. Now with letters like G and S, because they're curved, they may go a little bit above or below that line, and that's totally okay. You just want to make sure that when those guides are off that it looks normal. Okay, so now let's bring in the next letter. We've got the letter A here. And you guys kind of get the idea. You can see how we're doing this here. I'm just going to press Command T once I bring this in, hold Alt Option and Shift and drag inwards from any of the four corners to scale it down. And now just position it so that it is aligned along the top. All right, it's really not that bad once you start getting in there and doing it. You just want to remember to convert each of these individual letters into a smart object so that you can resize them multiple times without worrying about any loss in quality. Okay, and these letters are really beautiful and detailed and just pretty awesome looking. So it's going to look nice once you get it all set up. All right, so again, I'm just positioning this first word here. I'm going to do this one with you guys, and then I'm going to speed up the second part while I type out the remaining word, okay, which again is going to be opening. All right, so doing that, bring in the letter D here, do a free transform and scale it down, and then use these guides that we've put in place as a way to help you align your text. All right, now I'll zoom out a bit, and I'm going to kind of reorder these layers here. I'm going to label each of them accordingly so that I know which layers I'm working with here. Okay, here's the G, the A, letter N, and of course the R. Now, what I like to do, and you guys don't have to do this, is just kind of put them in order so you can kind of see over here in your layers the way that they're set up. I can see that I need to make a little more space, so I'm going to select the G, hold Shift and select the letter N, then press Command T to do a free transform, and then hold the Shift key and click and drag it over towards the left, all right, just so I can space it out. Now once I've done that, I'm going to hold Command and click on the letter D, so I have all my letters selected, and I'm going to press Command T to do a free transform. Now I can drag inwards while holding Alt Option and Shift just to scale these down and maybe play around with the positioning so that I have all my letters selected at once. All right, let's go ahead, place it somewhere over here. That looks pretty good. And now let's just go ahead and do the same thing with the remaining letters. All right, so I'm just going to close the ones that I've already used. I'm just using Command and the tilde to change to my other windows, and then Command and W on the keyboard to close them. So I'm just going to repeat this process here, and I'll probably speed this up just so I don't bore you guys too much as I place in the remaining letters. So I'll be right back once that's complete. Right, and it just really takes a few minutes to set this up properly, but it's going to save you some time down the road. I'm going to hold the Shift key and select the letter O, then hold Shift and tap it over to the left here just to make a little bit of space. Now hold the Command Control key and click on the letter G so you've got this whole word selected, and then hold Alt Option and Shift and scale this word down. Now again, I'm going to use the guides here from my rulers on the left side to just drag in a guide next to the G and the D in the word grand, and I'm going to use that a little bit to help me set this up. So now I've got my second line here all set up. We've got grand opening, and we just manually typeset all of these letters in a pretty short amount of time. So once we have all these letters, I'm going to select the very bottom one, G, hold Shift and select the top G and press Command G. Now put them into a group folder and rename this folder Grand Opening just by double clicking on the text and typing out a new name. Okay, now let's go ahead and double click on that folder, and we're going to apply a drop shadow. So check off the drop shadow option here, And then let's just go ahead and make sure that we're using 100% for the opacity, multiply for the blending mode, and for the fill, we want to use the hex value 8A5241, and then go ahead and click OK. Now your other settings should be a distance of 7, a spread of 19, and a size of about 18 pixels. All right, maybe we can make that a little bit smaller if we want. Let's bring it in. Maybe change the size to 8 and the spread to about 14 instead, just so it's a little bit better there. And there we go. Now I created this layer earlier, but I'm just going to delete it for now because we don't really need that at the moment. And what I'm going to do now is come into the side stands folder, and I'm going to select these top two copies here, the hue saturation adjustment layer and the stands, and then press Command J to duplicate it, Command E to merge them together. And all I'm going to do is press the letter M on the keyboard to get my marquee tool, and then click and drag a selection around this lower vertical part of the bar. Now once you've done that, click on the Layer Mask option at the bottom of the Layers palette to apply a layer mask, hold the Control key, click on the layer mask, and choose Apply Layer Mask. Now press Command T, hold the Control key, and click on it, and choose Rotate clockwise or counterclockwise, doesn't really matter. And then all we're going to do is click and drag to bring this up. Now, what we want to do here is make it so that we have a bar going behind each of these two words. So I'm just going to move this up here and maybe place this behind our original two stands. So just drag the layer down so it's below. Okay, and then I'm going to maybe duplicate this once by pressing Command J, just so it's a little bit longer. Hold the Shift key and the right arrow to move it over to the side here. And now I can select the layer below it, the original copy, by holding Shift and clicking on the layer below, pressing Command E to merge those together, and we've now got one horizontal beam going across behind our first word. So let's press Command J to duplicate that layer, hold Shift and tap down just to get this behind the second word. Okay, so we've now got these two kind of horizontal bars going behind our text. So if you want to reposition your grand opening text at all, which I think it looks pretty good for now, you would just want to make sure that you move each of these bars along with it. Go back to my freebies folder, go inside the TVartworks folder, and this time we're going to choose the Vintage Style Boards folder. Select Board 12, and then hold the Command key and click on the Color Mask 12. Now you'll notice this time I didn't do File Place Embedded because I wanted to select both of these at the same time. So now go ahead and click Open, and you'll get both of these layers open in new windows. So we're going to move this to the side here so we can see what we're doing, just opening these tabs. What I want to do is grab the color mask, click and hold the Shift key, and then drag it over here into the regular sign image. Now I'll close that window, maybe make it a little bit smaller. So you now have these two layers stacked on top of each other. What I'm going to do is hold the Control key and click on the top color mask layer to make it a smart object, and then do the same for the layer below. Now I'll select both of these and drag them into my working document, press Command and the tilde to come over to your other window, and now we can just close it and hit Don't Save. I have both of these layers selected over here on my layers palette, and if I press the number 5, it's going to lower the opacity of both of those layers. So that way I can kind of see the background as I'm moving this around. So now what I can do is press Command T to do a free transform, hold Alt Option and Shift, and drag inwards from any of the four corners, just so I can scale this down from the center. Now here what I'm looking for is just a good kind of position for this, and I want to place it somewhere, roughly in the center above the grand opening text. Okay, so somewhere about there looks pretty good, and when you're happy with the size and placement, go ahead and press Return on the keyboard. Now you can press 0 to bring the opacity back up to 100%, and what we're going to do here is once again use some of these colors from the color mask to help us make selections. So grab your magic wand again by pressing W on the keyboard, select the color mask layer only, and click inside some of this magenta area here. Alright, now you'll notice that I only got the top of it, so again we have to come up to Select and choose Similar, and now we can turn the visibility of that layer off. Click on the layer below, come down to the adjustment layer icon, and now let's add a black and white adjustment layer. And you'll see that it automatically has a mask applied to it, and it's just made our border here desaturated. Alright, so it has more of a silver look around the edges. Now let's turn the visibility of that color mask layer back on once again, and use the magic wand to now select the yellow area. Turn the visibility off, select the original sign smart object layer here, layer 1, which I'm just going to rename that really quickly. We'll call it Vintage Board 12. And now come back to the adjustment layer icon and choose Hue Saturation to about -3 or so, and then bump up the saturation to about 24. All right, so that's just going to give us a more vibrant and intense color. So now that we've modified that, we no longer need the color layer mask. All right, so I just deleted that other layer, and we now have this board. So now I'll select the black and white adjustment layer, hold Shift, and select the Vintage Board 12 Smart Object. Press Command G to put it into a group folder. And then let's just go ahead and call this Vintage Board 12. Now at this point, I want to make a little bit more room here. So if you'll notice, I don't know if you guys can tell, but there's these kind of copper or brass brackets along the bottom of this sign here, which we don't really want. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure we have Vintage Board 12 selected, that folder. Press Command T to do a free transform. And then I'm going to scale this up a bit more, so it's a little bit wider than my grand opening text, and then go ahead and press return. Now, for the moment, I'm going to select the grand opening text, that whole folder, open the side stands folder, and then hold the Command Control key and select each of those horizontal bars that we created before. Now, what you can do here is link these. So to do that, we're going to hold the Control key and click on any of these that we have selected and choose Link Layers. Now, we can just hold the Shift key and tap down, and we'll be moving all of these layers together. So even if I didn't have all three of these selected, if I only had one selected, I can still move them around and it'll be basically grouped together. So that's a nice little trick for you guys to link layers. We've made a little bit of space here so that we can see the bracket on the bottom of the sign, and what we want to do is get rid of that. So we're going to mask that out using the pen tool. Select the Vintage Board 12 group folder and press P on the keyboard to get your pen tool. And now all I'm going to do is come in here and click around these points really fast just so I can mask this out. In my previous tutorial, I kind of showed you guys a little bit how to use the pen tool, but I'll go through it quickly with you again. It's really not so bad once you get used to it, but all I'm doing here is clicking to make a point for any of the straight lines. But anytime there's a curved line here, if you want to make a straight line, I'm going to hold the Shift key and then click. All right, hold the Shift key and click, hold the Shift key and click. And now for this curved part, I'm going to click and hold on my cursor and then drag out that curved part. And then just continue to follow the rest of your shape. Okay, so we're going to go all the way around here just until we can get around these brackets. So if I zoom out a bit, you can see that we've now kind of traced around all three of them. I'm just going to continue the shape here around the outside of the sign, come all the way back around and close the shape. Now once you've closed the shape, just press Command Control plus Return on the keyboard, and that's going to activate a selection. Now make sure that you have your Vintage Board 12 folder selected, and then go ahead and click on the Add Layer Mask icon from the bottom of the Layers palette, and you will now have masked out each of those brackets. Okay, so far so good, guys. Let's go ahead and add another layer, and this time I'll press T on the keyboard to get my text tool. I'm going to click inside of this vintage board here, and I'm going to add the word summer. Okay, now I want to make sure that I have a solid white fill, which I do. You can see that up here in the top toolbar or over here in the properties. But what we don't have is our character panel, which I want to use to make a few more adjustments to this. So let's come up to the window menu and choose character to open that panel. Now all I'm going to be doing here is changing a few things, and for the typeface I'm using Marquee 4, which happens to be one of the fonts that comes in the full bundle. Now if you guys don't have access to this font, it's okay. There's a couple of good alternatives out there from using Babus or Franchise. Even good old Helvetica Condensed will do for this. Let's go ahead and change the size of our type to 32 in the character panel, and we can also change the tracking setting over here to 20. Okay, and now what we're going to do is just position our text somewhere over here towards the left. We actually want to apply the same shadow that we applied to our grand opening text. Rather than going back in and manually applying the same settings exactly as we did before, all I'm going to do is select the grand opening folder, hold the Alt Option key, and click on this little FX icon, and then just drag it onto the summer text, and you'll see that we've just duplicated that drop shadow effect. Okay, so once you've done that, select the summer text, press Command J, then Command and the left bracket to move it down one from the Layers palette, press Command T, then click and hold the Shift key to move this copy to the opposite side. Press T to get your type tool, double click in here and just rename, not rename, but we're going to change the text to read preview. Now let's go ahead and add another new layer in between these two. Press T to get your type tool, click somewhere in the middle, and now we're going to type out the word movie in all lowercase. I'm going to be using the font Smoothly, which is a nice cursive font, Smoothie script. Okay, and again, if you guys don't have access to this font, you can use any other nice cursive font, maybe like Birds of Paradise, Sign Painter, Back to Black. There's some pretty good free ones over on dafont.com that you guys will be able to use to follow along here. So once you've typed that out, we're going to again use our character panel to make a few adjustments. Let's first change the size to 42.5. Make sure that we have a solid white fill, which we do. Okay, and I'm just going to kind of place this in the middle here. So let me move that over. And I'm just going to make a little bit more room by selecting the preview text and tapping it to the right. Select the summer text and tap it to the left. All right, something like that. And I'm just kind of eyeballing it here, but you want to try to center this visually so you've got about the same amount of space on the right and the left side. Now once you're happy with that, go ahead and double click on the movie text and let's apply some layer styles here. The first one we're going to apply is the stroke. So go ahead and apply that, check off that box. Set a value of 2 pixels with a position on the outside in solid white. And now before we go ahead and close out of this, we're going to add an outer glow. Move the opacity all the way up to 100%. Leave the blend mode set to linear dodge. And now we're also going to use the same fill color. But for the spread, we want that set to 0, and instead of leaving the size up at 250, we're going to move it down so it's set to about maybe 70 or so. We're also going to apply a drop shadow effect. Now come in here to the drop shadow folder, make the opacity 100%, but change the blend mode from multiply to overlay. And now we're going to change the fill color to the hex value D8AD59, all right, which is this kind of yellowish color. Go ahead and click OK there. And now let's just go ahead and change the distance to 0, the spread to 30, and the size to about 18. And now click OK to apply the changes and close out of the dialog box. All right, so we now have our summer movie preview text placed on top of our sign. All right, so I'm just going to select these 3 layers, press Command G to put them into a folder, and call it Summer Movie Preview. Next, let's press Command Control plus O on the keyboard to go and open our next file here. And this time we're going to select Vintage Style Board 7 and Vintage Color Mask 7, and then choose Open. Now just like we did before, I'm going to move these side by side, select the Color Mask layer, hold Shift and drag it on top of the sign, make each of these a smart object, and then select them both and bring them into my main file. And then go ahead and press the number 5 to again lower the opacity so you can see what's happening here. Press Command T to do a free transform. And I can't really see the bounding box right now, so it's a little hard for me to resize. Quick fix for that is to press Command 0 on the keyboard to zoom out and fit this to your window. Now it's a lot easier for me to move my cursor over one of the 4 corners here and drag inwards while holding Alt, Option, and Shift. Now I'm going to press Return just to apply the changes for a moment here. And then I'll press Command and the semicolon on the keyboard so that I can see my guides. I'll use the rulers to drag a guide to the left edge of my previous vintage sign here, my previous vintage board, and then add another one on the right side. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want this board to be about the same width as the first one that we used. Okay, and now I can just resize it a little bit, do a free transform, and then just hold the Shift key and drag it into place. Now I'm just going to move this down a bit here by holding Shift and tapping down. And now we can press 0 on the keyboard to bring the opacity back to 100%. And once again press Command Control plus the semicolon key to hide your guides. Now let's zoom in a little bit here because this part is a little hard to see, but there's a dark blue border around the edges here. So what I'm going to do is select the color layer mask, press W on the keyboard to get the magic wand, and click on an area of that dark blue. Come up to the select menu and choose Similar. Turn that layer off, select the original sign below, come down to the adjustment layer icon and choose black and white. Okay, now again, that's going to make the edges this nice kind of rusty silvery color instead of the original color that we had. So let's turn the color mask back on, select the magenta area now, turn it back off, select the sign layer, come back down to the adjustment layer icon and choose hue saturation. So we're going to move the saturation, or we're going to move the hue slider to -3, and the saturation up to about 24. Okay, we can now go ahead and scrap that color layer that we brought in. And what I want to do now is hold the Shift key and select the sign. But before I do that, let me actually rename this here. I'll call this one Vintage Board 7. Hold the Shift key and select the top adjustment layer here. So we have all three of these layers selected together. And then go ahead and press Command J to duplicate them and Command E to merge them together. Now what I want to do here is actually make this sign a little bit taller. So now that we have a merged copy, I can press V to get my move tool, hold Shift and tap the down arrow a few times. Somewhere about there looks pretty good. Now let's go ahead and apply a layer mask. Okay, and then from there, press G on the keyboard to get your gradient tool, and take a look at the top toolbar here. We want to select this little color box here, and make sure that we have a black to transparent gradient. So the way that we can do that is by selecting this box in the lower left here, and change the color to black, click OK, and then click OK again. Now we're also going to change it from a radial gradient to a linear gradient, and now all we have to do is click somewhere in the center or the middle area here of our merged sign, hold the Shift key and drag down. All right, and you'll see that when I did that, it just kind of faded out the layer mask, so you can't really see that edge in the middle here. It's seamless, but it allowed us to extend our sign. Okay, so once you've done that, select the top merged copy, hold Shift and select the Vintage Board 7 Smart Object, press Command G on the keyboard to add it to a new group folder, and then let's just go ahead and double click and copy the name Vintage Board 7, double click the Group 1 text, and just press Command V to paste that in there. So as we continue to add some elements here, we want to make sure to keep the focal point on the text and everything. So at the moment, the top is a little bit bright. So let's go ahead and add a new layer, press G once again on the keyboard. So now let's click and drag from the top using our gradient to create a fade on there. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is just move this layer down. Okay, so that it's just above the side stands folder, but below the vintage board. Now I'll select that layer and press Command J to duplicate it, press Command T to do a free transform, and then hold the Control key and click on it and choose Flip Vertical. Now click on the layer, hold Shift, and move it down here towards the bottom, and keep going a little bit just so there's a slight fade on the bottom as well. Now press Command E to merge these together, double click the Layer 1 text, and just rename this layer Fade. Okay, and you can reduce the opacity if you want, or maybe extend it a little bit. So I'm going to press Command T, and just drag it up a little bit so the fade doesn't come in quite so much. Go to File, Open. We're going to bring in this arrow here. So select the arrow, hold Command, and select the color mask image, and then click Open. You guys will hopefully start to see the pattern here. I'm going to click on this color layer, hold Shift and drag it over, close out of that, make each of these layers a smart object so that we can resize them, hold the Shift key and select the one either above or below and drag it into my main document. Now I'm going to press Command T on the keyboard so that I can scale this down by holding Alt, Option, and Shift and dragging inwards from any of the four corners. All right, and now I'm just going to rotate it a bit so it's kind of pointing down. All right, hold Shift and adjust it as needed. Maybe rotate it a little bit more here. Okay, and then press Return once you've got it in place. Now press 5 on the keyboard so you can see through the sign so that you can see what you're doing. And if you need to, press Command T again to resize it, scale it, or play with the rotation. Press 0 to bring the opacity back up, select the color layer, then grab your magic wand, W, and click on this yellow area. Turn the visibility of that color layer off, select the arrow layer below, come down to the adjustment layer icon and choose Hue Saturation. And now we're just going to boost the saturation up a bit. So let's move it to about 25 or so, 25 or 26 looks pretty good. Now I'm going to select the Hue Saturation Adjustment layer, the Smart Object layer below, and press Command G to put it into a folder. And let me also just rename this Smart Object layer. Okay, so I'm just going to call this 17.png or arrow, whatever you want. Now do the same for the group folder. I'm just going to call this folder arrow. Go ahead and collapse it. And now you can get rid of that color layer that we were using before to help us modify the arrow. And now what we want to do is apply the shadow effect. All we've got to do is hold Alt Option, click on the effects icon next to the grand opening folder, and drag it onto the arrow folder. So now we'll have the same drop shadow effect applied. Command J to duplicate it, Command T to do a free transform, hold Control and click on the arrow, and then choose Flip Horizontal. Now I'll click and hold the Shift key and drag it over to the opposite side. Alright, so we're going to have an arrow on either side pointing down. Hold Shift and select the folder below and press Command G, and now put both of these into a group folder just called Arrows. So we've got them both in there together. Okay, so at this point we're ready to continue bringing in some typography here. So we're going to bring in some more letters from TVartworks. Let's go back to the Resources folder. Okay, and we're going to now choose the folder without bulbs. Now you'll see in here that we've got a number of letters as well as their accompanying color masks. So just like we did with some of our other signs and arrows and things like that, we're going to select each of the letters with their mask. So first let's select the letter D, hold Command and select the color mask, and then choose Open. Okay, and it's going to be the same process here, guys. We're going to click and drag each mask over, convert both layers into a smart object, select them both and drag them into your main document. Okay, and now what we want to do is place these above our vintage boards. While I have this here, I'll press the number 5 on the keyboard to reduce the opacity, Command Control plus T to do a free transform, and then drag inwards from any 4 corners of the bounding box to scale it down. Okay, now let's zoom in a little bit here. I've got the first letter placed over on the left, and now I'll press 0 to bring the opacity back up, zoom in a bit, and press W to get my magic wand, and select only that color layer. And now click on the area here of solid red. Come up to Select and choose Similar. Turn the color layer off, select the letter below. Come down here to the adjustment layer icon, and now we're going to select Hue Saturation once again. All we're going to do here is boost the saturation up a bit to about 15. Alright, somewhere about there. And now I'm going to hold the Shift key, select the Hue Saturation adjustment layer, and now while I'm still holding the Shift key, I'm going to select the letter layer below. Now press Command G to put this into a group folder and just call it D for the name of the letter. Okay, it seems pretty self-explanatory, pretty easy. But again, we're going to repeat this for the remaining letters here so that we can spell out the word design. All right, so I'm going to select the next letter, the letter E, hold Command and select the color mask, and repeat this process. All right, so we're bringing in both of these layers, converting them into smart objects, bringing both of them into our file, doing a free transform, and remember, if you can't see the bounding box, press Command Control plus 0 to fit it to your screen, and then drag it inwards from any of the 4 corners while holding Alt, Option, and Shift. All right, now I'm going to zoom in, and one other thing that I want to do here, again, use the ruler, drag in a guide to the top of the letter D, as well as the bottom. What we're going to do is just use these guides to help us position our letters. All right, so now we've got the E in here, that's looking pretty good. Use the magic wand to select an area of the red, choose Similar, turn that layer off, select the letter below, go to the adjustment layer icon and choose Hue Saturation, and then we're just going to bring the saturation up to about 16. Make sure you have that adjustment layer selected, hold the Shift key and click on the letter layer below, press Command G to put it into a folder, double click the Group 1 text and call it E. I want to show you guys a really quick keyboard shortcut to just rearrange things in the layers palette. This works with layers, folders, anything. So hold the Command Control key and then press the left bracket to move that letter down. And then we can just hold Shift and tap the left arrow a few times to make the letters a little bit closer together. Okay, so I'm going to repeat this process for the remaining letters here to spell out the word design. And I'll be back to you guys in just a few minutes. Okay, now we're going to repeat this for just one more word. We're going to spell out the word cuts. All right, so we're going to have design cuts down here on the bottom. and put all these letters into another group folder and call it Cuts. Place it below the design folder. And now what I'm going to do is just create two more guides here. One on the left side of the letter D here in design, one on the end. I'm going to select my Cuts folder, press Command Control plus T to do a free transform. And now I'm going to scale these up. So this is part of the reason why we left them as smart objects, so that we can resize them without any loss in quality. Okay, so now I'm going to select both of these folders, scale them down a little bit together. Now, if you want to, you can place both of these into another folder, and just call it Design Cuts, and then hold the Alt Option key and click and drag the FX icon from the Grand Opening folder onto this, so that we've got our same drop shadow applied. And really quick, guys, I'm just going to go ahead and reorder some of these layers just so it makes sense. Maybe it's an OCD thing for me, but I kind of like when my layers are the order in which they appear. So something like this. Okay, I'm just going to set it up so that I've got my summer movie preview on the top, the vintage board behind it, grand opening, then we've got the arrows, design cuts, the next board, vintage board 7. We've got this fade in the background, our two side stands, as well as our moon. All right, now let's go ahead and zoom in here. Select the design cuts folder, create a new layer, press T to get your type tool, and then click to create some text. Now I'm going to type out the words presented by, open up my character panel from the window menu here. Now click inside and let's go ahead and change this typeface to Avenir. Now most of you guys should have this font, but if you don't, you can use any really kind of bold or sans serif font, just something clean and nice looking. All right, and then once you have that in here, we're just going to change a few things. So I'm going to make it Avenir, leave it set to the black style, and I'm going to change the size to about 12 point and make the tracking maybe around 480, something pretty wide like that. Center it here and put it into a folder called Presented By, and then apply that same drop shadow effect. So again, just hold Alt Option and click that FX icon onto the group folder. Okay, go ahead and create another new layer above that one. Press T once again, and this time let's go ahead and type out Avant-Garde in all caps. Click inside here to select all of your text, and now using the same Avenir black, let's go ahead and change the fill color though to FFD7B1, which is this kind of light peach color. It's going to pick up some of the tones from the sign. Okay, and then we're going to change the size to about 16 point and make the tracking about 200. Now once you've done that, I just want to make one more adjustment here. So come up to the top toolbar and you guys will see this little T with the curved line under it. So we're going to click on that to warp our text. Click on the style option here and choose arc. Make sure you have a horizontal bend selected. And then for the bend value, we're going to enter a value of about 60, then go ahead and click OK. And I'm going to put this into a group folder of its own by just copying the layer name first, Avant-Garde, press Command G to put it into a folder, double click the group 1 text and press Command Control plus V to paste the name, and then just go ahead and click and drag that FX icon back onto the Avant-Garde text. I'm going to select the Summer Movie Preview group folder and press Command J to duplicate it, Command T to do a free transform, and then hold the Shift key and just drag this down here so it's in between the Avant-Garde text and the Presented By. Okay, now I'm going to scale it down a bit by holding Alt Option and Shift and dragging inwards from any of the four corners of the bounding box, just to scale that down. All right, let's go ahead and move this layer down here. Grab your type tool and click inside the word Summer here, and we're going to change this from Summer to say Creatives, and then press Command A to select all. And we're going to come over to our character panel here and just change the tracking to 120 to space out the letters a bit. Hold the Shift key and tap this over just to make a little bit of room. And now grab your type tool and click inside the preview box. And for this text, we're going to, again, change the tracking to 120. Okay, somewhere about there looks pretty good. And now we can select this whole folder here and rename it. We're going to call it Creatives in Cinema, which means that we're also going to have to change this movie text to just say in. Okay, maybe tap it over a few times. Now hold the Command key and select the Creatives text layer above. Then hold Shift and tap the right arrow a few times just to move it over here. Okay, and then you can kind of use your guides here to eyeball it so that there's about the same amount of space on both sides. Now we're going to select that whole folder, press Command T to do a free transform, and just make it a bit larger. So all I'm doing here is trying to basically line up the edges of the W with the N and the D. So let's go ahead and move the Design Cuts text down a bit along with the Presented By. So I'm going to select the Design Cuts group folder, hold Command and select the Presented By above it, then hold the Shift key and just tap the down arrow maybe 2 or 3 times. Select the Creatives and Cinema group folder and do the same thing. Just tap it down once while holding the Shift key. Now we're going to go ahead and bring in another custom element here. So let's go back to the Freebies folder for this tutorial. And this time I'm going to select the End PNG along with the End Color Mask. Bring these both in. And we're going to do the same thing we did before with our letters. So I'm just going to make each of these a smart object, place one on top of the other, and then bring them both into my main document. Press Command T, hold Alt Option and Shift, and scale it down by dragging inwards from any of the 4 corners of the bounding box. And now I'm going to place it somewhere in here. Okay, under Avant-Garde, but above the Creatives in Cinema text. Okay, so try to do it without making any spelling mistakes like that. And then again, I'll probably have to fix this just so I can get the alignment looking good. Okay, and now back to the ampersand. Select the red with the magic wand. Choose Select Similar. Turn that layer off. Select the original ampersand layer below. Come to the adjustment layer icon and choose Hue Saturation. Now I'll select the adjustment layer as well as the smart object layer below and put it into a group folder. You can call it And. Get rid of the color mask, and now just go ahead and click and drag the effects icon onto that folder. So we've now got the same shadow applied to all of this text. Now, really quick, I just want to line this up because I'm, kind of doubting my my visual alignment here. So all I'm going to do is select the Avant-Garde text, hold the Shift key, and select the Design Cuts group folder. So I've now got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 folders selected at once. And I'll come to this top toolbar here and just choose the Align Horizontal Centers option to align all of my text. Now add a new layer just above the ampersand. Zoom in a bit here so you guys can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to press the letter U on the keyboard to get my Shape tool. Now by default, I'll have the Rectangle tool, but if I hold Shift and tap it again, you can see that I scroll through, and I want to keep scrolling through until I get to this tool, which is the Polygon tool. Now I'm going to select this stroke setting on the top here, change it to white, and change the pixel value to about 12 instead of 4. And over here on this side, you can see where it says sides. I want to leave that set to 3. Now, all I'm going to do is hold Shift and drag out to create this triangle shape. Press Command T to do a free transform, and then just rotate it a bit so that you can get the edge to be flat. Let's move it over here a bit, and then go ahead and press Return on the keyboard. Now, the Shape tool basically creates what would be considered the equivalent of a vector shape in Photoshop. So that means that it has points that can be manipulated. And to do that, we're going to grab our Direct Selection tool over here in the toolbar. Now by default, you guys might have your Path Selection tool. We don't want that one. We want to make sure that we have the white arrow. So go ahead and select that, and now you can see that I can click on any of these 3 points. So I'm going to click on this point on the lower left and drag it out. Click on the top point, hold Shift and drag it to the right, and just make this edge flush. All right, so I want to make it a nice straight edge here so that you end up with a nice, what is this, an isosceles triangle? I don't even know what kind of triangle this is called, but go ahead and double click on the layer to bring up your layer styles, and we'll now check off the inner shadow option. And all we're going to do here is make sure that it's set to a blend mode of multiply, an opacity of 100% with solid black. And now let's change the distance to 4. And we're also going to adjust the choke. Let's make the choke 7. And let's go ahead and reduce the size to 5. And then go ahead and click OK to apply the changes. Press Command J with the polygon. Press Command T to do a free transform. Hold Shift and move it over here to the right. Hold Control, click on it, and choose Flip Horizontal. Alright, so now that you've done that, select the top polygon in the Layers palette. Hold Shift and select the one below. Press Command G, double click the Group 1 text, and rename this folder Triangle with an S. Okay, so now I want to add a little bit more depth to this. So what I'm going to do is select Vintage Board 7. I'm going to expand that folder so that I can see what I'm doing here. And all I'm going to do is hold the Command Control key and click on the layer thumbnail here. All right, for the top merged copy. hold Shift and the Command Control key, and then click on the original. Okay, so it's now got the entire sign selected, not just the bottom portion that we created, not just the top. We're gonna have the whole thing selected here. Now select the Design Cuts group folder, and then go ahead and add a new layer. Now using the same gradient tool that we had before, I'm just going to click and drag from the bottom up here to create a nice fade along the bottom of the image, and then maybe lower the opacity a little bit to, let's say, about 60%. And we're going to open up our next image here. We're going to go into the miscellaneous folder and open the top scaffold from scene 2 file. Pop that open in Photoshop, move it to the side here, and just drag it into our document. Now this I want to place at the very top. Okay, I'm going to press Command G to put it in a folder and just call it top scaffold or scaffolding. Okay, and then I'm going to press Command T to do a free transform. Move this all the way up to the top here. Maybe make it a little bit larger as well, just by dragging out while holding Alt, Option, and Shift. Okay, and then we're just going to move this to the very top so we've got these bars in front. So we'll come back to the previous folder, go into the stands, and this time open Stand Boards E. All right, I'm going to drag this into my file here. And this time I want to place this just above the Design Cuts group folder, maybe on top of the fade as well here. And then I'm just going to move this down a bit, just so that it can come in front Design Cuts text. Okay, something like that looks pretty good. We just don't want to obscure too much of the text on the bottom here. Make sure that we have the bottom scaffolding selected. Hold the Alt Option key and click on the adjustment layer icon, and now choose solid color. Check off this box that says use previous layer to create clipping mask, and then go ahead and click OK. Make sure that you've got a solid black fill, and then click OK again. And now we're going to lower the opacity of this to about 60%, just so that it's mostly dark and kind of blends in a little bit. Now select that adjustment layer, hold Shift and select the original scaffolding smart object below, press Command G, and call this folder bottom scaffolding. And now we're also going to apply that same drop shadow. So select the effects icon from any of the other folders, hold Alt Option, and just drag it onto that folder. Now I'm going to come back into the side stands folder from the beginning. All right, and what I want to do is select these top 2 layers in here. I'm going to press Command J to duplicate them. And now all I'm going to do is maybe scale them down by pressing Command Control plus T on the keyboard. Hold Alt Option and Shift and drag inwards. Okay, and I want to place this higher up. So I'm going to press Return, hold the Command key, and tap the right bracket a few times. All right, so that we can bring this up a few positions in the layers palette. Okay, now while I still have these 2 layers selected, I'll press Command T, hold Control and click on the layer and choose Flip Horizontal, so I can just flip it the other way. Now press Command G to put it into a folder, and we'll call this one Bottom Scaffolding 2. Hold the Alt Option key and click and drag the effects for the drop shadow onto this folder. Double click it because we're going to add another layer style. Instead of using the adjustment layer or the clipping mask like we did with the previous bottom scaffolding, I'm going to apply a color overlay. All right, and what I'm going to do is make sure it's solid black and set the opacity to about 30%. Go ahead and click OK. And now after looking at it, I just want to reposition the bottom scaffolding a little bit more. Okay, just so we can have some depth going on. We've got a few different kind of scaffolds in here right now, and that's looking pretty good. Now let's go back and we're going to open some more freebies here. So we'll come back to the TVartworks folder, go to the miscellaneous folder, and open up the smoke. Okay, I'm going to grab this whole folder, click, hold the Shift key, and drag it into my document. And I'm going to press Command in the right bracket to move this basically all the way to the top. All right, I want this up top here. Press Command T on the keyboard, then Command 0 to zoom out so I can see the whole thing. And I'm just going to scale it down a bit. Hold Control and click on it and choose maybe rotate 90 degrees clockwise. Scale it back up a little more. Okay, just so we can kind of get the smoke in place. While I have this folder selected, I'm going to hold Alt Option and click on the adjustment layer icon. And now choose black and white. Check off this box that says use previous layer to create clipping mask. All right, and that's just going to make all the smoke black and white, but because of the clipping mask, it should not affect any of the layers below that. Okay, so again, have this folder selected, come back down to the adjustment layer icon. This time just click on levels. You don't have to hold Alt, Option, and Shift, and the levels adjustment will automatically have a clipping mask applied because it's kind of sandwiched in between an existing clipping mask and our folder. Now all I'm doing is moving this left gray slider in towards the right until it's set to about 72. Now what we're going to do from here is select the smoke folder, hold Shift and select the black and white adjustment layer. Press Command G to put this into a new group folder and just call it smoke. And we can play around with the size and positioning of each of these 4 smoke objects inside. Alright, so I'm just going to press Command T to do a free transform. Maybe position this over here a little bit, kind of towards the outer edges. I don't want it to be obscuring too much of the design or the text. It's really just to help us get a little bit of ambiance and atmosphere. Okay, and you may also want to play around with the opacity a little bit. Feel free to do that just by selecting each one and tapping a number on your keyboard. Alright, so for example, this one's set to 90. I'm going to bump it down to about maybe 50 just by tapping the number 5, or maybe 40 by tapping 4. And then once you're happy with the size and positioning of all of your smoke, you can go ahead and collapse that folder. Now let's go back to File, Open, return to the Miscellaneous folder, and this time we'll open the bokeh effect from Scene 2. I'm just going to click and drag the bokeh effect in here, and once I bring this in, I'm going to change the blending mode from normal to screen and reduce the opacity to about 32%, just typing the numbers 32. Now what we're going to do, because this is a smart object, is apply a smart filter. So all we have to do is go up to the filter menu. The process is exactly the same, and choose Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we're going to enter a value of about 45. Now why is this a smart filter? Well, when you apply filters to smart objects, you actually have the ability to go back in and change the parameters. So if I wanted to adjust this later to make it either more or less of a blur, I could do that very easily with a smart object. If I had just left this maybe a raster image, I would not be able to do that. I'd have to basically create the whole thing again. Alright, so now let's put this into a folder of its own. Just call it bokeh, like that, and that looks pretty good. And that also just adds a little bit of atmosphere, just like the smoke. Now let's go back to our freebies folder, and this time I'm going to open up the stars from Feingold Shop. Let's open this up here, click and drag it over into our document, and then I'll press Command T just so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to press Command 0 to fit it to my screen, hold the Control key, click on it, and then rotate it 90 degrees clockwise. Hold Alt, Option, and Shift, and maybe just scale it down slightly, reposition it a little bit. And now I'm going to press Command J to duplicate it one more time. I can select both of these layers and now kind of move them around together. And you can see some of these like white dots in here. It almost looks like dust, which is kind of another nice addition here. Now, once you're happy with the size and placement of both of these, make sure they're both selected in the layers palette. Press Command G to put them into a new group folder, and I'm just going to call them stars. Now, I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. Once again, grab my gradient tool, press G on the keyboard, and I'm just going to click and drag from the left side of the canvas inwards a little bit to create a little bit of a fade here. Now I'm going to press Command J to duplicate it, press Command T to do a free transform, hold the Control key and click on it and choose Flip Horizontal, then click and hold the Shift key to move it to the opposite side. Alright, now with the top one selected, press Command E to merge it with the one below, double click on the layer and rename it Fade, and that is also just going to help us create this kind of nice vignette effect so that the focus can stay on the inside of the image. Alright, now let's go ahead and add one more nice detail here, guys. We're going to come back to our grand opening text from the beginning, select the grand opening folder and add a new layer just above it, press G to get your gradient tool again, and now let's select the radial gradient. Now select the color as well, and we're just going to change it from black to solid white so that we have basically a white to transparent gradient. Now you saw me just modify the color in here because I wanted to make sure that the color it was fading to was also white instead of black. Okay, so you can do that. The bottom 2 boxes control the color. The top 2 boxes here control the opacity. All right, go ahead and click OK. Now what I'm going to do is click and drag out to make a small white gradient. Go ahead and change the blending mode to overlay. Okay, so that I can add some highlights here over my text. All right, press Command J to duplicate that first highlight, Command T to do a free transform, and then basically just kind of play around a little bit with the positioning of your highlights to see where they look the best on your letters. All right, and this just adds a little bit of brightness and a nice touch so that everything is not the same brightness throughout. All right, creates a little more interest. And I'm just going to copy this a few more times, maybe scale these down a bit, just to add some more highlights here to the title. Probably going to end up with maybe about 6 or 7 of these. You don't have to put a highlight on every single letter, but you just want to mix it up a little bit, right? You may change your mind after and decide to move one somewhere else, but once you are happy with all of them, select the very top one, hold Shift and select the bottom one, then press Command G to put them into a group folder, double click the group 1 text and change the name to Overlay Highlights. And then let's just go ahead and reduce the opacity of the highlights a bit to about 50% by tapping the number 5 on the keyboard, just to tone it down slightly. It still creates a pretty nice effect there, which you guys can see, and that's looking pretty good. Now I'll come to the very top layer, the fade here, then come down to the adjustment layer icon and add a hue saturation layer. And all we're going to do here is move the saturation slider up a bit, maybe to around 15 or let's see what looks good. Yeah, 15 or 16 I think will look pretty nice. But once you're happy with everything, all we're going to do is select the background layer at the very bottom, scroll up, hold Shift, and select the hue saturation adjustment layer. Press Command G to put all these other folders and layers into a folder, and we're going to rename it Artwork. Now, press Command J to duplicate the entire folder, then Command E to merge it together. And once it is done doing that, we're just going to call this Artwork Merged, and be sure to save your work. So now that we've basically completed our flat poster design, let's go ahead and drop it into a mock-up to see if we can push it a little bit further. Now for this, I'm using a mock-up, a free mock-up that you guys can download, and there'll be a link for that in the written portion of this tutorial. But it's basically a theater poster mock-up, which looks pretty cool since we're doing a summer movie preview poster. Alright, so once you open this up here, you'll see that you basically just have 2 layers. You've got your background, and you've got this artwork layer, this smart object layer that's in perspective here. And you'll see over here in the layers palette, it just says your design here. So let's double click on that to open it up. And now come back to our main composition. And what we're going to do is basically just check something real quick. We know that we set this up as a 6x9 poster. So let's come into the artwork here, the smart object file that we're inside. Come up to the image menu and choose canvas size. All right, and we now just want to change this to make it a little bit bigger. We're going to make it 6 inches wide by 9 inches tall, just so it matches the dimensions of our poster. And now we can come back to our artwork, select the merged copy, click, hold the Shift key, and drop it into the smart object here. And it should fit perfectly. All right, now you can delete this artwork in the background or leave it, whatever you want, and then just press Command-Control+S to save it. And then once it's done saving, press Command-Control-W to close the window. Okay, and now you can see that we've got our nice looking poster here. So let's add one last finishing touch, guys. I'm going to come back to the freebies folder and open this nice overlay from MixPixBox. And we're just going to drop this on top of our mockup. All right, so bring that in, change the blend mode to maybe screen or color dodge, looks pretty good. And then just reduce the opacity a bit, maybe to about 60 or 70%. Okay, and then just play a little bit with the positioning of it there. And that just adds a nice little bit of brightness to keep our eyes over here on our nice looking poster. So that about wraps up our tutorial, guys. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I know we covered a lot of stuff and it was a pretty in-depth tutorial today, but I hope that you've had fun and picked up some new tricks along the way. If you guys check out the Ultimate Creative Design Bundle, there's a ton of stuff in here that'll basically be your one-stop shop for all of your design needs for pretty much any kind of project that you guys would need. I mean, there's great fonts in here, some cool effects, a lot of really great stuff that you guys can use in your projects. So we'd love to see what kind of stuff you guys create with these elements and with some of the tips and tricks that we've covered today. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.